It was the quiet before the storm, a kind of stillness that seemed to stretch across the world, heavy and pregnant with unspoken emotions. The German shepherd, Max, stood at the threshold of the shelter's back door, his paws anchored firmly to the cold concrete. His coat, once gleaming, now appeared weathered and worn, like a warrior returning from battle. His ears were perked, and his body stiff, yet there was a gentle tenderness in his eyes, a contrast to the fierceness he was known for. He had been through it all: rescue missions, late-night shifts with his handler, and training exercises in the biting cold. But today, his usual confidence felt like a distant memory. He was about to meet someone, a soul as fractured as the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. The door swung open, and a scent filled his nose. The faint trace of fear, mixed with the undeniable warmth of another living being. The girl was there, huddled in the corner of the shelter, eyes wide with panic, unable to comprehend the world outside her mind. She had been locked away, silenced by the trauma of the life she had endured. Max moved closer cautiously, every instinct telling him to take it slow. This moment would either break her further or help rebuild what had been shattered. Max had seen his fair share of rescues. From pulling victims from rubble to navigating treacherous floodwaters, he had been through it all. His sense of purpose was clear: help the helpless. But standing at the shelter's back door, watching the cold interior, something gnawed at him. He wasn't sure why this was different. Perhaps it was the walls, stark, sterile, and unforgiving. Or perhaps it was the way the staff spoke about Bella. They didn't use the words a rescue or a recovery. They spoke in hushed tones, using phrases like a shut down and extremely fragile. Something in their voices, even their silence, told him that this mission wouldn't be like the others. Max was a trained German shepherd, honed for such missions, a symbol of strength, loyalty, and focus. But as he took his first cautious steps into the shelter, his usual certainty wavered. He paused at the entrance to the kennel room, eyes scanning the dimly lit area. There in the corner of the room was Bella, lying in the farthest corner, her body curled in on itself as if trying to shrink from the world. Her fur, once glossy and full, now looked dull, matted with dust. Her eyes were wide but unseeing, as if she was trapped in a world of her own. Max's heart sank. He had never seen a dog so completely shut off from the world. He had worked with other rescue dogs, dogs that were skittish, nervous, even aggressive, but none had this deep, suffocating withdrawal. Bella didn't even flinch when Max entered the room. He stood there, watching her for what felt like hours. The humans in the shelter explained her history: abandonment, neglect, and the long months of fear that had crippled her. The shelter staff had tried everything. They brought her food, gave her space, and tried coaxing her out with gentle voices and tender hands. But nothing had worked. Bella had retreated so far into herself that she could no longer interact with her environment. They told Max that she needed someone who could understand her silence, someone who wouldn't force her to be a better. She needed someone patient, someone who wouldn't rush her. Max took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had been through many training exercises and countless life-threatening situations, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His role here wasn't about solving the problem, or even about leading the rescue. It was about offering something far more delicate: the space for healing. He slowly moved closer to Bella, every step deliberate, careful not to startle her. His paws moved soundlessly across the floor, his senses acutely attuned to every nuance of the room. The faint smell of disinfectant mixed with the older, more comforting scent of the bedding. The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't cold. It was a space filled with an unseen heaviness, a tension in the air that spoke of long years of suffering and isolation. Max sat down just a few feet from Bella, staying still, his body low, his gaze soft. He wasn't sure if she could sense his presence, but he knew he needed to be patient. He needed to show her that he wasn't here to rush her, that he wouldn't force any responses. He simply had to be. Time moved slowly. The other dogs in the shelter were barking in the distance, but Bella didn't react to them. Max watched her carefully, his head slightly cocked to the side. There was a flicker in her eye. It wasn't much, just the tiniest shift, but Max saw it. The stillness in her body seemed to soften for a brief second. He didn't move, didn't breathe too heavily, just watched. The moment passed. Her posture tensed again, and she retreated inward. Max shifted slightly, his body trying to stay low, still but a slight tension that he couldn't shake. Every instinct told him to move closer, to touch her, to make the connection. But his training reminded him that there was nothing to be gained from rushing this. The bond had to come naturally. If it was to happen at all, it had to unfold at her pace. And so, Max sat and waited. The hours passed. The world outside the kennel seemed to continue on without them. Max's mind occasionally wandered to his past missions, his training, his work with soldiers, his work with the injured. But this was different. He had never encountered a situation where the only action was inaction. The emotional pull was unlike any he had ever experienced before. There was no immediate task, no clear-cut objective. There was only Bella, this fragile creature who had learned to close herself off from the world. The shelter staff had left for the night, and Max was alone with her. The quiet was oppressive now, almost suffocating. Bella still hadn't moved. Max took a step closer, his tail relaxed, his body as non-threatening as possible. But Bella didn't budge. Her eyes were still open, but they had dulled again, the initial flicker of recognition vanishing. He moved a little closer, extending his paw toward her slowly, placing it softly on the floor. Her gaze shifted toward him, her eyes narrowing, then widening in fear. Max stopped. He could feel the tremor in the air between. She was teetering on the edge, not of aggression, but of the fear that had built up over months of isolation. Max didn't retreat, but he didn't move forward either. He simply sat, his paw resting gently on the ground. Slowly, he inched closer, just a little at a time. His heartbeat was steady, slow, and he watched Bella's body language for any signs of stress or fear. The stillness in the room stretched on for what felt like forever. Bella's eyes never left him. Her body remained taut, but there was a slight shift in her posture. Max couldn't explain what happened next. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it a sudden breakthrough, but there, in the quiet of the shelter, the moment arrived. Bella took a slow, cautious step toward him. Her movement was hesitant, as if her body had forgotten how to trust. But it was enough. The barrier had shifted just a little. Max remained still, his heart full. It wasn't the grand rescue he had anticipated. It was more of a quiet promise that this was just the beginning. Bella hadn't responded like other dogs he had helped. She had taken that first step. And for Max, it was enough. The first contact was made, not with a paw, not with a command, but through a shared silence, an understanding that reached across the invisible barrier between them. The next morning arrived quietly, the first light of dawn creeping through the shelter's windows, casting a soft, golden glow on the cold concrete floor. Max was already awake, as usual, his body alert, his senses wide open, even in this unfamiliar environment. He had always been a dog of action. Every rescue mission, every moment of service had been about doing. But this was different. Max lay in his corner, just beyond Bella's line of sight, watching her from a distance, feeling the weight of her silence. The room was still. Too still, the kind of stillness that makes a dog's instincts itch. The air between them felt heavy, charged with something unspoken, an energy that neither of them knew how to break. But Max wasn't just any dog. He wasn't going to force anything. He knew that breaking through Bella's walls would take time, and he was prepared for it. His training had taught him to be patient, but this wasn't just a mission. This was about connection. He had spent the night lying on the cool floor, barely moving. He could feel Bella's presence, the faint rustling of her coat, the sharp scent of fear that still clung to her. Her eyes, though wide open, still seemed so far away, detached from the world around her. She wasn't looking at him now, but he could feel her awareness. She was aware of his presence, even if she didn't know how to react to it. Max gave her space, not rushing, not overwhelming her with his desire to help. He knew better. Bella was like a frightened animal. One who had been hurt so many times that she couldn't imagine a world beyond the hurt. She had been conditioned by trauma to distrust everything, even kindness. Max understood that now. He understood that the silence between them wasn't the same as a lack of communication. She was talking to him in ways that words couldn't express. Her body language, her tense posture, her shallow breathing, all spoke louder than any bark or whimper. Max's eyes softened as he watched her. He didn't move. He didn't need to. There was a quiet power in stillness, a power he had learned from years of training and observation. He wasn't going to rush her. For the next few hours, they remained in this quiet space. The shelter around them hummed with life, other dogs barking in the distance, but in their small corner, it was just the two of them. Silent, waiting. Max lay on his belly, his tail twitching only slightly with each passing minute. Bella was still, her body curled tightly, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. Max had learned long ago that trust couldn't be rushed. It couldn't be forced. He had seen it in the way other rescue dogs responded. The small shifts, the glances, the tiny signs that told him they were ready. He would know when the time came. The sound of footsteps outside the kennel made Bella tense, her body stiffening in a reflexive reaction to any sudden movement. Max didn't flinch. He remained where he was, calm and steady. He knew this was her instinct, but it was also a sign. Bella was reacting to something she perceived as a threat, even though she had no reason to fear him. He was her safe space now, but she couldn't understand that yet. Max took a breath, steadying himself. He didn't move, but he watched her closely. The room was still quiet. Bella's tail twitched once, and then a slow, trembling movement followed. Her eyes darted toward him for the briefest of moments before she quickly looked away, as if the connection had been too much. Max held her gaze for a few seconds before turning his head away, letting her process the interaction. It was a small victory, but it was one that meant everything. Bella had acknowledged him. Slowly, Max rose to his feet, making sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't looking for a reaction. He was simply testing the waters. He approached her cautiously, his head low, his body relaxed. He wasn't going to demand anything from her. Max stopped just a few feet away from Bella, sitting down again, his back against the wall. The space between them was still wide, but it wasn't an impenetrable gap. The silence hung in the air, but now it felt different. It was no longer filled with fear, but with the quiet tension of possibility. Bella's eyes flickered once more, this time not in fear, but with curiosity. The moment was fleeting, and Max knew it. He didn't move any closer. He didn't need to. The connection had been made, however subtle it was. Bella had taken a small step, not physically, but emotionally, and for Max, that was everything. Hours passed, and still there was no rush. Max didn't need her to jump into his lap or greet him like the other dogs did. He didn't need anything but the quiet acknowledgement that she was there, and that he was here for her, not as a rescuer, but as a companion. Slowly, Bella began to adjust to his presence. She didn't retreat as she had before. Her breathing slowed, her posture relaxed just a little. Max lay down again, his eyes fixed on her. The quiet between them was no longer deafening. It was becoming a shared space, a space where they could both exist, neither forcing the other to speak, but simply being. The shift in Bella was small, barely noticeable, but Max felt it. She wasn't as rigid as before, her eyes softer, her body less tense. He could see it now. She was beginning to trust him, just a little. Max stayed in the room with her, offering nothing but his presence. He could feel the change, the subtle shift in the air. Bella was no longer the scared, unreachable dog that had been locked inside her own mind. She was beginning to open up, even if it was just the smallest crack. And Max knew this was only the beginning. Max had always been a creature of patience. His training, his temperament, his role in countless rescues had all honed his ability to read situations, to sense the smallest shift in energy, the faintest movement in the air. And over the past few days, something in Bella had begun to change. It was barely noticeable at first. A subtle twitch of her ear, a brief flicker of her eyes toward him, the smallest, almost imperceptible steps toward trusting him. But Max could feel it. His body had attuned itself to the rhythm of Bella's silence, and now every tiny movement was a sign. She wasn't shutting him out anymore. She wasn't retreating into herself as she had before. The walls she had built so high around herself were starting to crumble, slowly, carefully, with every moment of shared space. But that's how it had always been with Bella. She had learned over time to hide herself from the world, to protect the parts of her that had been shattered. She didn't trust easily, if at all. And Max, in all his experience, knew that breaking through that barrier wasn't about loud gestures or forceful affection. It was about letting the silence between them speak for itself. That morning, as the first rays of light filtered into the shelter, Max sat by Bella's kennel again. He was getting closer now, inching toward her presence every day without forcing. The room smelled faintly of clean bedding mixed with the distinct scent of a dog who had been through more than her fair share of suffering. Max sat in the same spot as the day before, his body low to the ground, His posture relaxed, his gaze soft. He could hear the other dogs in the shelter stirring, barking, but Bella remained still. He had learned to read her body language, the way she carried herself, the way she held her breath when something startled her. There was a subtle tension in her movements, a faint quiver that ran through her body when someone walked by her kennel or when the shelter doors creaked open. But it wasn't the same kind of fear that had consumed her in the beginning. No, it was something more complex now, more layered. It was hesitation, and hesitation, as Max had learned, was a bridge. Max tilted his head slightly to the side, watching her. Her eyes were open, but her gaze seemed distant, lost in thought, somewhere beyond the room they shared. Her body was curled up in the same tight, protective ball, but there was a softness now, a shift. Bella wasn't completely closed off anymore. There were small, barely noticeable signs that told Max she was beginning to feel the quiet comfort of his presence. She wasn't retreating, she was simply unsure of how to move forward. And that, Max knew, was a step in the right direction. A few moments passed, and Max, never one to rush things, decided to stay still. He wasn't going to make a move. He would let Bella take the lead, as he always did. Slowly, almost as if testing the waters, Bella shifted her position. She extended her front legs just a little bit, stretching her neck toward the bars of the kennel. Max's heart leapt. It was such a small movement, but in that simple act, Bella had made a choice. She was moving closer, even if it was just a fraction of an inch, and that inch mattered. Max didn't move. He simply stayed where he was, his eyes fixed on her, calm and patient. He could feel the tension in the air, could feel how deeply Bella was calculating every step she took. Every movement was deliberate, slow. It was as though she was dipping her toes into the waters of trust, testing the surface before she submerged herself completely. Max understood. Without moving too much, he gave her the space to decide what she wanted. He had learned the power of patience. So much of rescue work was about waiting for the right moment, for the right sign. Bella was still processing everything. Max couldn't force her to accept him, but he could create the conditions in which she might feel safe enough to reach out. And then it happened. Bella looked up, her eyes meeting his for the briefest of seconds. It wasn't long, but it was enough. There was no panic, no fear in her gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. In that fleeting connection, Max could see it. The spark of recognition. Not just the recognition of him as a presence in the room, but the first tentative recognition of him as someone she could trust. The silence that had been so oppressive, so thick between them, suddenly felt different. It wasn't filled with the weight of fear anymore, but with something else. Something gentler. The tension that had once radiated from Bella's body began to ease. She wasn't stiff with terror. She was softening just a little in the quiet comfort of Max's steady gaze. Max let out a soft, slow breath, careful not to overwhelm her. He shifted his position slightly, just enough to show that he was open, that he wasn't going anywhere. The slightest movement, the gentlest sign of encouragement. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Bella the reassurance she needed. Max took a small step forward, his movements deliberate and slow. Bella watched him, her eyes wide but not fearful. She didn't retreat. Instead, she stayed where she was, her body still but no longer tight with anxiety. Max's heart fluttered with quiet hope, but he didn't rush. He moved closer, his body low to the ground, every step taken with care. He could feel her gaze on him, and though her body remained tense, there was a softness in the way she looked at him now. He stopped just a few feet away. The space between them wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Max sat down, his body relaxed, his gaze still gentle, his tail slightly wagging. He wasn't expecting anything. He didn't want to force her to act. But the connection between them had shifted. It wasn't just the slightest acknowledgement. It was the first sign of willingness, the first sign of trust. Bella had made her choice. She hadn't run, hadn't hidden. She had stayed. Max waited, his gaze never leaving hers as the minutes stretched out in the quiet room. The dogs outside barked, the shelter's air was still, but in that moment, Max knew something important had happened. Bella was still far from trusting him fully, but she had taken that first step. That inch forward. It was the beginning of something new, something fragile but real. And Max remained still, his presence the anchor. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't pushing. He was waiting, just as he had learned to do. Time passed, and Bella didn't move, but she didn't retreat either. She had made the choice to stay in the space with him. Yeah, and for now that was enough. For Max, that was more than he could have hoped for. The next few days passed in a delicate rhythm, like the soft tapping of rain on a window. Constant, but not intrusive. Max had learned to respect Bella's pace, just as he had done for every rescue dog he had worked with. But something felt different about Bella. She wasn't like the others. Her silence, her withdrawn nature, was a barrier unlike anything Max had encountered. He had always been able to help dogs trust again, but this was something deeper, something tied not just to abandonment, but to a profound fear, a fear that ran through her very bones, shaking her from the inside out. Bella was beginning to respond to him, but it was slow. There were moments when she would look up at him with those wide, uncertain eyes, and Max would freeze, his body still, his gaze soft. Every inch of him was attuned to her, waiting for that spark, that moment when she would finally take the leap and trust him completely. But she wasn't there yet. Max had seen dogs in pain before, but this was something different. This wasn't physical injury or illness. This was a soul scarred so deeply by the horrors of its past that even the most comforting touch couldn't immediately erase the damage. Bella's trauma wasn't something Max could fix with simple commands or playful gestures. It wasn't something that could be solved with time alone. It was an invisible wound, one that held her in place, one that kept her from being able to move forward, even if she wanted to. Max, however, was not discouraged. He had learned to read the smallest signs, the subtlest shifts in behavior, and as the days went by, he saw something in Bella's movements that told him she was beginning to stir from her silence. One morning, as the sun filtered through the shelter's windows, Max walked in as usual to find her in her corner, curled up tight like a small ball. But today there was something different. Her eyes, which had previously darted away at the slightest movement, now stayed fixed on him. She hadn't moved, but her gaze held steady. It wasn't the wild, panicked gaze of someone caught in a trap. It was tentative, uncertain, but not afraid. Bella wasn't retreating. She was observing him as if trying to make sense of the gentle giant before her. For the first time since he had met her, Max saw the smallest glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. She wasn't ready to approach, but she wasn't pulling away there. Max sat a few feet from her, keeping his distance, letting her decide if she wanted to close the space. The room was quiet, save for the occasional sound of the other dogs barking in the distance. He remained still, his tail just slightly wagging in anticipation. Minutes passed, and Bella stayed in her corner, her eyes never leaving his. Max didn't speak. He didn't need to. He wasn't going to rush her. He simply stayed where he was, offering her the time and space to make her choice. It felt like an eternity, but it was only a few minutes before Bella shifted her body just slightly, her paws stretching out in front of her. The movement was hesitant, a careful testing of the waters, but it was a sign. Max didn't move a muscle. His body remained low, his posture relaxed, as if to tell Bella that there was no rush, no pressure. She didn't have to move any closer. But the moment she made that shift, no matter how small, was everything. It was the first sign that she was willing to take that step, even if it was an inch at a time. Bella's movements were so small, so careful. Her body didn't shake with fear as it had in the past. Her posture wasn't rigid with panic. It was almost as if she was testing her own strength, testing the boundaries of her own heart. The room felt thick with the quiet weight of her hesitation, and Max felt it too. He could sense the walls she had built, the layers of pain and distrust that wrapped around her like an impenetrable shield. But for the first time, that shield was cracking. She was beginning to trust him. Slowly, but surely. Max remained still, allowing her to process what was happening. He could see the inner turmoil, the battle inside her mind. She wanted to trust him, but she had been betrayed so many times before. Her memories, her past, were chains wrapped tightly around her, holding her back. And Max, in his quiet, patient way, was offering her the chance to break free. It was a fragile moment, one that could have easily slipped away. Bella's eyes fluttered, then softened, and for the briefest of moments, she lowered her head. Max's heart swelled with quiet relief. The first step was always the hardest, and though Bella hadn't taken the leap to approach him, she had taken a step in the right direction. She had opened herself to the possibility of trust. That was everything. The following days saw a gradual but noticeable shift. Bella began to make small, deliberate movements. She still wouldn't approach Max, but she no longer hid from him. She would look at him for longer stretches of time, her gaze not filled with the panic and fear that had consumed her before. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes now, an unspoken recognition of the safety he represented. It was a slow, painstaking process, but Max could feel it. He could feel her growing, even if it was just an inch at a time. But that was how it always started. The first step was always the hardest, and Bella was taking it, one small movement at a time. Max's bond with her deepened, not in grand, overt moments of connection, but in the quiet shifts that only he could see. He spent hours sitting in the room with her, offering nothing but his presence. His calmness, his steadiness became the anchor she needed to begin to heal. She didn't need him to fix her. She didn't need him to do anything but be there, just as he had done from the beginning. Max didn't know how long it would take for Bella to fully trust him. It could take weeks, months, or even longer. But he had no doubt that the trust she was beginning to offer was real. It was fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. And that was enough for Max. That was all he needed. The weeks that followed were quiet in the shelter, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Max, once a sharp, focused rescuer, now found himself tethered to Bella by a bond that was built not on commands or training, but on something much deeper, something that couldn't be quantified. It wasn't just about the quiet patience he had offered her. It was about the trust she was learning to give. It was about the silent promise they had made, between the stillness and the silence, that she wasn't alone anymore. Max spent his days with Bella, not in grand gestures, but in the small, tender moments that only a dog like him could understand. Every morning, he would enter the shelter room quietly, his body language relaxed, offering her the space she needed to approach him at her own pace. And little by little, Bella began to show more of herself. At first, it was small things. A brief glance toward him, a tiny shift in her position, the softest wag of her tail when she saw him sitting nearby. These were the first signs that she was starting to recognize him, not as a threat, but as something safe. Max didn't rush her. He couldn't. Every inch forward she made was a victory, a quiet triumph of trust that told him more than any command could. He would lie by her kennel at night, his presence steady, just a few feet away, a silent guardian. The world outside continued to spin, the sounds of other dogs barking and humans walking by, but in this small corner of the shelter, time seemed to move at a different pace. Here, it was only Max and Bella, two souls quietly trying to find each other in the stillness. And then one day, something changed. Max had been lying near the door when he heard a soft sound, a rustling, the faintest of shifts. He turned his head, his body going still, his senses honing in. There she was, Bella, her eyes no longer distant but focused on him. She was standing, her body trembling slightly, but she wasn't hiding. She wasn't retreating. Her body language was still uncertain, but there was something different in the way she looked at him. There was no panic in her gaze, no fear that had once kept her locked in a cage of her own making. It was as if, in that moment, she finally saw him, really saw him, and she wasn't afraid. Max remained motionless, not wanting to break the fragile moment. He knew that this was a turning point. The first real connection between them, the first step toward healing that Bella had made on her own terms. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. All he had to do was wait and let her decide how she wanted to bridge the gap between them. He could feel her watching him, assessing him. He felt her heartbeat quicken, and for the first time he sensed a softness in the air between them. She was curious, tentative, yes, but curious. And curiosity was the beginning. A few minutes passed. Max didn't rush, didn't urge her forward. He simply sat, his eyes soft and unblinking, his body low and relaxed. Bella took a step closer. It wasn't much, just a small shift forward, but it was enough to make Max's heart swell. He knew that she had made a choice. She had chosen to trust him. And then another. Max didn't move. He stayed still, his body relaxed, allowing her the space to approach. It was a delicate dance, one that neither of them had fully mastered, but they were learning together in their own quiet way. Bella's eyes flicked from him to the floor and then back to him. Her tail twitched slightly, and she lowered her head, a gesture that wasn't of submission but of quiet acceptance. She wasn't completely healed, and she wasn't fully ready to embrace him, but she was acknowledging his presence in a way she hadn't before. Max, ever patient, took another small, deliberate step forward. His eyes never left hers. The room seemed to close in around them. And yet, It felt as if the space between them had already begun to disappear. She was no longer the broken dog huddled in a corner, isolated by her trauma. She was a creature of instinct, of heart beginning to understand that the world around her could be safe again. And then, it happened. Bella slowly but surely approached Max. Her movements were hesitant, her body still trembling slightly, but she came closer. And then for the first time since he had met her, Bella leaned in. Max's heart swelled. He didn't touch her immediately. He simply stood still, his body vibrating with the tension of the moment. Bella's nose brushed against his, just a soft, tentative touch, like the first raindrop of a storm that would soon come. It was brief, delicate, but it was real. She had reached out to him, and that was the moment everything shifted. He lowered his head, letting her come closer, letting her decide the pace. He didn't need to rush this. The trust that had formed between them was fragile but real, and in that quiet moment, Bella had taken another step, toward him, toward healing, toward a future where she wouldn't have to face the world alone. The days after that moment were filled with small victories. Bella began to approach Max more often, her movements less stiff, her gaze less distant. She would sit near him, not in the corner of the room, but close enough that he could feel her warmth, the soft rhythm of her breath. Max didn't touch her unless she initiated it. He had learned that respect and patience were the keys to unlocking the heart of a dog, like Bella. And with each passing day, the silent barrier that had once separated them began to dissolve. Max spent his time teaching Bella, but not in the way one might train a dog. He taught her the language of trust, the language of presence, of patience, and of quiet understanding. Bella began to wag her tail more often, not just when she was fed or when the staff came to clean her kennel, but when Max sat beside her. The soft brush of his fur against hers, the quiet companionship that he offered her, slowly started to fill the void she had carried for so long. But the process wasn't without its setbacks. There were moments when Bella would retreat again, her fear rising to the surface like a tidal wave, threatening to drag her under. Max never pushed. He stayed with her through those moments of doubt, through the silent panic that would seize her body, reminding her that there was nothing to fear in his presence. Each time, she would come back. Each time, she would take one more step toward trusting him. One evening, after what had been a particularly challenging day of triggers and setbacks, Max found Bella in the corner of her kennel. Her eyes were closed, her body curled tightly into itself, but there was a softness in the way she lay, a quiet calm that hadn't been there before. Max approached as he had done many times before, but this time when he sat beside her, Bella didn't flinch. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, she made the choice to rest her head on his paw. The moment was small, almost imperceptible, but to Max, it was everything. It wasn't just the softest form of acceptance, it was the beginning of Bella's healing. Bella wasn't fully healed, she wasn't fixed. But for the first time, she had taken a step not just towards him, but towards herself. And Max, watching her in that moment, knew that whatever it took, he would stay by her side. He wasn't just here to rescue her. He was here to help her find herself again.